Hello, everybody. So excited to have y'all here with us on this lovely Tuesday, wherever y'all are joining us from. We have this lovely panel of guests here who are going to talk about their experience being in the media industry, working within the media, working within nonprofits, working for themselves, all that good stuff. And so I'm so excited for you to meet these lovely individuals. It's also Hispanic Heritage Month, so wepa to everybody who identifies within the Latinx community from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, all of it. Rep your flags, rep your places. Just want to say hello. Thank you for joining us. We have Miss Keisha Katz, Miss Ashley Velez, and Miss Vanessa Vancour with us, joining from all different parts of the world, both ethnically, geographically, and all that good stuff. So I'm going to pass the baton on to them so they can tell you a little bit more about them. And we will start with Vanessa. Vanessa, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Vanessa Vancour, and I am based in Reno, Nevada. I grew up in California. I'm a West Coast gal, and my background is I'm a U.S. born Mexican American. So my mother is from Mexico, and my dad is from Massachusetts. So I'm a French Canadian Mexican. And my background is in journalism. I trained and studied to be a TV journalist, so a visual journalist. And then throughout my career, I've worked in digital media, digital strategy. I taught journalism at the university level for a number of years. And then now I have my own company, The Encouraged, where I do strategic storytelling, bilingual community outreach, and coach public speakers.
I love it. Thank you. Ashley, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Well, I always start off by telling everybody I'm from Philly because I will run my mouth about being from Philly until the day I die. But yeah, I'm from Philly. I have a background in journalism with a focus on documentary. I first got interested in documentary after taking a social justice documentary class in college. And they pretty much embedded us in a school in Philadelphia and said, like, find your story. And we ended up documenting the school, trying to keep their school open after the district announced that they were going to close 27 schools that year. So that was really formative for me, and it made me want to continue to pursue documentary. So I went on to study it, to study journalism with the documentary focus even more. And since then, I've been working in the digital video industry. For a while, I worked for a company called The Root as a senior video producer. And then I transitioned into TV, doing documentary TV work, and recently began teaching about documentary and digital video production at John Jay College.
Nice, nice. I love it. I know you rep Philly hard, especially now that you're in New York.
I do.
and, and Keisha, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Keisha Katz. I am from Queens, New York. So I'm a New Yorker, but special place in my heart for Philly. I went to Temple University where I met Adriana, so lots of love for that area. I am Black and Puerto Rican. I am a mom of two beautiful kids. And my background is in broadcast journalism, specifically for unscripted television series. I've also done just other documentary shorts as well. Currently, however, I work as the Director of Workforce and External Partnerships at RealWorks, which is a nonprofit organization based in Brooklyn, New York, that provides access to youth and young adults to create their own stories through filmmaking projects, and then also to enter the workforce in whatever area of filmmaking that we have some trainings and opportunities in. So trying to help other people get into the industry that I love is what I do now.
I love it. I love it. Such a broad range and yet such similarities too. So I'm so excited for this. For those of y'all who are with us, if you want to tell us where you're tuning in from, what you're hoping to hear about, Anything else that you want us to know? We do have some questions we're going to ask the panelists, and then we're also going to open it up to you all for, just to see what you want to know and about whether it's their individual work, their way into the industry, all that good stuff. All right. My first question for you all, and I'm going to go backwards this time. I'll start with Keisha. What has been your favorite project to work on?
Yeah, so I favorite is hard. I think all my project Ashley's like, yeah. I think all my projects are so different. Um, so if I can quickly answer with two responses, I know that's cliche, but I think that the project that I enjoyed the most was when I was working at NBC. They were doing a live production of The Wiz. And that was gonna air on, on their network, and it had Mary J. Blige and Neo and Common and Queen Latifah and all these really awesome people. But I was working on the behind the scenes special that was going to air before. So I had like my little camera crew, my sound guy, my DP, and we were just interviewing the different talent there. And I got to like really see how a live production or like behind the scenes of that. And that was just a lot of fun. And just navigating a new space, working, with different talent, higher talent than I had worked with in previous instances. So that was really fun. And I think my other favorite, which is probably my most impactful story that I worked on for me, was when I was working at ABC and we were doing a special with Katie Couric and we went down to Charlottesville, Virginia during the riots when they were having there was a lot of issues around the statues that were up in the community and what those represented. And so we were there for this just big riot that happened between a lot of the folks from the left that came there to protest. And it was like I had not done real journalism on the street that way. Everything I did was like planned, and we had set up interviews. This was like we did that, and then we didn't know it was going to turn ugly, and we were in the middle of it, and we had to pivot, and we had security, and I was with Katie, and I was like, this is madness. But it was it was just so important to be able to be there and to shed the light on the folks from that community that really were very passionate about the challenges they were going through. So those are my two. Like, I had a very fun, and then I also had a really like reflective, challenging a work that I was a part of.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. That is definitely different sides of the spectrum and still within one industry, right? Like deciding on like what you want to do and what you want to pursue, and sometimes just being thrown into something and figuring it out. We do have people tuning in from all over the place. I just want to shout them out. We have people from the West Coast, the middle of the country, the East Coast. So thank you all for joining us. Ashley, same question. What has been your favorite project to work on, or to, if you don't have a favorite, then something that's just been really impactful for you?
Yeah, echoing Keisha, it's always really hard to pick a favorite. I feel like I'm asked this question a lot, and usually it's like the last thing that I worked on because it's like most fresh in my brain. But after giving it some thought, I would say I'm going to name two as well. There was a project that I worked on with the Root called A King's Place. And we basically looked at different streets that were named for Martin Luther King Jr. And we analyzed different social issues that were happening on those streets. So in Harlem, at 125th Street, we talked about gentrification. In DC, we found out that that MLK Boulevard Avenue was the most over-policed area in DC. And then in Atlanta, we analyzed the presence of churches and their role in modern social justice movements, because churches are overrepresented on MLK Boulevards, we found. So that was something that was just really cool to work on. And I felt like we could go on forever just analyzing, literally every MLK Boulevard and street in the country. So that was really fun. And it was just different and unique to be able to work on that. So that stands out. And then I would say a project that I worked on for a museum that recently opened in South Carolina. I co-directed 3 short docs for them, just about just kind of like subcultures, Black subcultures in South Carolina. And we worked with a lot of elders for it. It was with a creative agency called Draw House. And it's just so nice to be able to interview elders. I feel like so many times, we're used to interviewing people like in our age range or younger, and interviewing elders who have lived long lives with long stories to tell. Often, like, they just kind of want someone to listen to them. Like, you just sit down and talk to them, and they have so much knowledge and wisdom to share. So I also feel like that just strengthened my storytelling as well, being able to get them to trust me with a camera in front of their face and also just being able to soak in, all of their life knowledge and wisdom. So that definitely stands out as a favorite.
I love it. Thank you. And your project on MLK streets all over the country reminded me of this book that I saw. It was like 10 years ago. That was pictures of MLK streets, boulevards, roads, like throughout the entire country. So that's literally what I was picturing as you were talking. Thank you. And Vanessa, same question. Your favorite project to work on or something that really had a huge impact on you?
My favorite project points to something Keisha said in the intro on working with, helping folks get into the industry, this idea of mentorship. And I taught at the university here in Reno for 6 years in the journalism school, and I founded a bilingual media production program that had two objectives. One was to start having coverage of our Latino community in Northern Nevada, specifically bilingually, because at the time there really wasn't a lot here. And then also to train emerging journalists to enter a field knowing that their language is an asset and that being bilingual and multicultural is an asset in the workforce, and to know that they can go into the industry and contribute in a way that is meaningful and try to either shake things up or create their own spaces and their own production. So that has been my favorite project thus far. I was able to found it and run it for 6 years, and as a result, see so many amazing young people go through the program and produce really meaningful work. We did a lot with our public radio station. The news director at the time and I co-founded a paid bilingual internship, which was huge because it is an English language public radio station, and we started to introduce Spanish on the air and really thinking critically about diversifying sources and thinking about the kinds of stories we would do. And one of my favorite stories that one of the journalists did was on the economic impact of the quinceañera industry in Northern Nevada. Like, no one had ever looked at, and there wasn't a lot of data around what that industry meant. And for any of us who know about quinceañeras, our industry here is pretty much like May through October. Every single weekend, there's like 3 to 5 quinceañeras, and it engages with so many different vendors that it has a huge impact, not just culturally for our Mexican community, but also for economically all the folks that it engages with. So anyway, that's my favorite project for many reasons, because we were able to test a model and prove that there was a need for this. But I think more importantly, it was really challenging what it meant to infuse language into storytelling and what it meant to really think critically about who we interview as expert voices, and getting to partner with a public radio station and digital outlets was incredibly meaningful. So students now can earn a degree in Spanish language media from the journalism school, which is also huge for undergrads, and it lives on, and folks are still able to contribute in that space. So that's my baby. That's my proudest project, and the one that and still working with young journalists, I think is really meaningful to let them know that there's a space for them, and there are folks like us here to support them in their journey.
I love that. I love comparing like Spanish newsrooms to like English ones, like where I'll watch like Telemundo versus NBC and watch the same thing and see how like they talk about it and what they emphasize. So I love the fact that you started with this program and is continuing. Just for our audience, anybody who has a question, anything that's come up from the projects that they've worked on, or things that you want to know, feel free. Sorry, I can't speak today. Feel free to throw it in the chat, and we will definitely have time to answer those. But yeah, anything that comes up, feel free. Next question. I'm gonna start with Ashley this time. What are some of the key challenges you've encountered when striving for work or projects in media production? And what strategies have you found effective in overcoming them?
Yeah, I'll start with the strategy and then go into the problem. My strategy that I learned to do, which was difficult because I'm a Virgo and I like to plan and know what's ahead, is to be flexible. And I know we all have an idea of what like our career will look like. And honestly, like being flexible has allowed me to experience things that I never thought I would. Um, and to go into the problem, it is hard to make money and make a living in the media industry, especially if you are kind of single track minded. The media, especially digital media, is in flux. There are constant layoffs. It is hard to keep a consistent job. And then, if you freelance, you have to pay for your own healthcare out of pocket and things like that. So it can be a challenge. And keeping consistent work can be a challenge. You kind of have to be on top of networking and making sure that you're constantly chasing something. So being flexible has really allowed me to explore different avenues. I've done the quote unquote 9 to 5. That's never a 9 to 5 because you work all this overtime. I've done freelancing, which I'm still consistently doing, and now I'm transitioning into teaching at a college level and trying to usher in new people into this field as well. And just being open to that. Teaching is something that I always knew I wanted to do at some point, but I didn't think I would start it so soon. And starting it so soon actually is like really renewed my love for it. So I think that that's a lesson for myself, and just like being flexible and allowing your career to go, a multitude of ways.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Vanessa, same question. Key challenges you've encountered and then strategies
Mm-hmm.
you found effective.
Yeah, welcome to teaching, Ashley. I'm excited to see your journey there. That's so great. Um, I think one of the challenges I encountered was referring back to that program I mentioned is when I was starting to develop key partnerships with other newsrooms or folks who might want to collaborate in some capacity, specifically through a media lens of distribution or co-creation. I often encountered having my work wanting to be otherized and like sort of saved for these special sections. And folks saw the value or would say, this is a really great idea, but we'll put a little section for you on the website because we can't air this because that might be weird for our consumers or viewers or listeners to suddenly introduce Spanish. And it became a recurring theme, a recurring issue that folks liked it or expressed that they liked it, but they wanted to put it over here and not integrate it with the rest of the work. And I think it was a great learning for me. And it was also incredibly frustrating trying to navigate what the solution could be, to understand how can I understand what motivates them, what possibly could convince them otherwise. And the truth is, in some situations, depending on the institution, you may just be reduced to a special section. Although I do think that's changing a bit in the media landscape, but at the time it was incredibly difficult, and I actually think it still is. And so that was a huge challenge, and I navigated that by really creating our own space. We were a digital outlet. We collaborated with newsrooms that said yes, and I think that's what we're seeing is that a lot of folks, when we have a hard time belonging in other places, we make our own space in production companies. But that also, I think to Ashley's point, makes it hard to have a sustainable career sometimes, because a part of it too is if a budget has been sort of carved out for special projects that aren't woven or integrated into like broader media budgets, then you're also, I think, having to constantly convince people that no, this is woven into everything. So I think the solution has been finding other like-minded, value-aligned people and trusting that even though they're hard to find sometimes, there are folks out there with larger budgets who are committed to investing in different ways of telling stories and investing in really truly being mindful of diverse representation. But again, to Ashley's point, it takes so much work to network and find that sometimes. And I think also for folks who are thinking of legitimacy through certain lenses. So I worked in higher education for a number of years, and what we consider experts doesn't always align with folks who are doing the work in the community. And I think having to educate people on what expertise and legitimacy means can take some work sometimes. So, but I think where I have found success is in collaboration and is in staying firmly rooted in this belief that there are plenty of folks out there who are aligned in a similar vision, and we will find each other and we'll make it happen. And I do see that there are some shifts happening that are making these kinds of stories feel a little bit more accessible.
Absolutely. And before we get to Keisha on the same question, I'm hearing this, this theme of like flexibility, but also perseverance, right? And understanding that it's going to take some time and it's going to take some grit and it's going to take a lot of no's. But when you get those yeses, you get the projects that you get to work on, right? And the ones that make an impact on you. So absolutely. Thank you for sharing those. Keisha, same thing. Key challenges you've encountered and, some effective strategies that you've used in overcoming them.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question, Adriana, because I love hearing Vanessa and Ashley's responses, and so much of what they said resonated with me. So, I'll try to say some things a little differently. I think for me, I feel like I navigated a few different things, or some of the challenges that I faced were around, um, especially when I started working early on. My first media job out of college was at a major network company, and which was great, but also brought a lot of. It was the first time that I realized, oh wow, like there are very few people who look like me, and I know a lot of people say that, and we always talk about DEI and inclusion, but when it was like 2007, and it was no, sorry, it was 2010. 2010 or 2011, somewhere around there, 2011 probably. But anyway, and I realized, so not only were there were fewer women, there were fewer Black women, there were fewer Latino women, there were fewer young women. So I think that was a challenge for me as well. Like I always felt like I would show up on a set and I would be, especially when I got to an associate producer level, I would be, you know, I would be sort of commanding the room of people who were older than me, who were white, who were just like, and I had to really like own my space. And I had to really make sure that I was so on point. Like I had to work so hard to be on point, to make sure that I was going above and beyond in my role, constantly proving yourself, right? To build a reputation. And I think that's one of the first thing I learned early in the industry was that your reputation is so important. And people above you, they talk, and they, especially in the executive level, and they talk about, if they want you on their project or what producer they're going to place you with. When I was in, that role, and it was really important to make sure that I had a good reputation, that people wanted to keep working with me, and that I performed well. But it was a lot of pressure, right? Like in that role all the time, constantly proving yourself. So I think that was a challenge for me, like finding the space to feel like I was getting the respect and the doors open to me that I wanted to be open to me. I also struggled a lot with moving up. I felt like there was definitely points where I had been at a company for several years, and I was like, hey, I know that I can do something more, and I had to have several meetings with HR, and I had to have several meetings with the executive producers and the different individuals to say, like, here's my resume. Do you remember that I've been on X amount of projects? I've done X amount of things. I would look at my job description and look at the job descriptions of people above me and try to like compare and contrast to try to see what am I missing to be able to prove myself that I can move up to the next level. I ultimately had to leave like a company and start freelancing and going to other places to be able to move up the ladder. So that was some of the challenges I faced. And I think one of the things, I was just trying to take notes when the ladies were speaking, but I think definitely networking, I would emphasize for me, because I did a lot of networking, went to a lot of events, but I think strategic networking, because I think in this industry, it really is about who you know. But I also think about who you know, and if you have a good reputation with that person, can they open up a door for you with somebody else? So have them do an introduction to somebody else. Have them say like, oh, I'll take you out to coffee and personally introduce you to my colleague over here. So I think a lot of that is what ended up opening the doors for me, is that the producers I worked with started to freelance in the docu television space here in New York, and go to other places and then say like, oh, Keisha, are you interested in coming on to this company and being on my project? And then now you're in a new place. You already have a good reputation because somebody there can vouch for you, and you just start to assert yourself. And then the other thing I would just offer is like to keep learning. I feel like I was very big on, and I just don't have as much bandwidth and time in my life right now, but very big on going to like listening to webinars like this, going to, different kind of like free workshops, and just trying to stay ahead of the curve. So that way, I just continue to have more things to add to my resume. As I did a ton of like asynchronous, like, Coursera courses and LinkedIn learnings and different kind of like, just whatever I could. I went to a public, what was it like? It was a public media station just to learn Avid and like different editing software, because they were offering it for free, and I was like, I'm in this community, I'm gonna take advantage of this resource, and just to be able to kind of stay up to date with the software and the technology. So yeah, that was something for me. Like a solution is like, have a great reputation wherever you go and just keep learning.
I love that. Thank you. No, I mean, I think within any industry, right, there's this need to network, right? And I think all of us as underrepresented women in our industries, like, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do you put yourself out there without feeling like you're being arrogant or cocky because you know what you're producing is great, right? Or you know what you have to offer is absolutely what somebody else needs because you're going to just level up that project. And I know we talk a lot about networking, and Keisha, thank you for touching a little bit about like what does it mean to have strategic networking, right? But for our folks who are new to the industry, right? Like I know for Vanessa and Ashley who have been in the teaching space, and Keish, I know you work with a lot of young folks who are interested in learning about the industry. Like, how do you teach somebody how to network within the industry? Like, I know we talked about it being strategic, but what does that actually look like? And anybody who wants to take this on, go ahead, Ashley. I got you.
I hate, even though I mentioned like the word networking, I hate networking. I don't think it's like when you actually position it as like a thing that you have to do, it's terrible. It's not enjoyable. I hate going to events that like the sole focus is to network. For me, I actually saw Issa Rae said in some interview that she really networked across instead of networking up all the time. And that really stuck with me. And for me, like in my own life, that means like going out to get coffee with people who I just really enjoyed working with and keeping that network. Like not necessarily trying to always climb up and getting into the next room, but keeping up with people who I just enjoyed working with, because when like they have you as top of mind, they're going to put your name in a room for another project. And that's honestly how I've gotten so many of my projects, just by maintaining good relationships with people. The last project that I worked on this summer, one of the directors who was on it, I think like right after I interviewed, I texted her and I was like, hey, we should go grab coffee. And as we're at coffee, I was like, I'm interviewing for this project you might be interested in. Mind you, it's the same project. Like, I'm not looking at it as there are limited roles. I'm looking at it as like, this is something she'd be really good for, regardless of whether or not I get it. And she goes, oh, actually, I was going to tell you about the same project. And we both got our jobs on it. So that's an example of just like really looking out for people. People are going to look out for you as well. And you take those people with you. Often, especially in this industry, it's a lot of work to try to find new people to work with. So in a lot of the projects that I've been on, there are multiple people who have worked with each other before. So that's what I'll say about just kind of like networking across.
If I can chime in,
Yeah.
yeah, that reminds me of like, so also just within your peer circle, right? And I know like, right now there's a strike. So if you're in scripted right now, I know, it's very challenging, but typically like when there was a space where I was getting a lot of work, sometimes I would get offered a project or someone would want me to interview for something like Ashley said, and I was booked or I was already committed to working on something else. And so being able to recommend a friend not only got them the job, but also like they do pay it forward. And also like if that recommendation is good, then it's still like, like you're the person that wanted to hire you was like, oh, well, great. Thank you for giving me someone else in my in my sphere, in my network, that I can now also go to for future job opportunities. And I always, of course, did my best to try to recommend, if I could, people, of my community that was working in the industry, and try to make sure like I can keep bringing more diversity to spaces. But yeah, I think it's so important to network across, like Ashley said, but also so that way when either, or if you got sick or there's something you need somebody to replace you on a job, you have someone that you can say like, this person I vouch for, they're great, they're going to do a great job, here's their number, give them a call. And then that person's like, thank you for doing half the work for me and finding a talented individual. So I think that's so important in this industry.
I love that. Vanessa, any last tidbits that they didn't cover?
I don't think so. I laughed when Ashley said that, because I do think networking makes us all feel a little bit icky because it feels transactional. And I think what I'm hearing and what I also feel is that it's relationship building. And I refer to it as the seed planting, and there's a nurturing component to it. And what I tell my students, because I've worked as a mentor or been a part of mentorship initiatives for journalism around the country, is thinking about mentorship as mutually beneficial. And I think part of what I also heard on here is this idea of not always coming to the table with something to ask. There's a moment where you will explicitly have a need and say, I am looking for this, or I need help doing that. And I think the more specific you can be, the better. And don't be afraid to say it and ask people directly for it. But I think also, if I coach my students or younger folks in their career to come to the table with something to offer too, and to reach out when you saw something that reminded you of them, and you're not always asking for something. And that's just, I think, the basis of nurturing relationships from a genuine standpoint. And media jobs are really intense, and it usually work with folks over a long period of time. And especially when you're on deadline, it's, I think finding the people and with whom you can be in sort of these like high pressure situations, like when you find those people, you want to work with them again, and you also want to recommend them to other folks because they're talented, or they're cool under pressure, or they're really generous in the way that they give feedback. So I think just this idea that don't call it networking, don't think about networking. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship you're building. And also in that, like, try to ask yourself, like, what can you bring to the table as well?
Absolutely. And I love all that. And for all of y'all who do know me, I work with a lot of students. And so we're always talking about networking and to getting into whatever industry you want to get into. Two things I would say is, one, if you're walking into an event that's just for networking, or like everybody there is for networking, don't be the person that's like, I got everybody's number, right? Be the person that came out with like, 1 to 3 quality conversations versus I spoke to somebody for 5 minutes. I think those are the ones where you start to build that relationship, right? And you can have that introduction conversation without being transactional, without saying like, this is what I need and this is what I'm looking for. You start that conversation, and then you follow up a few days later and you ask them for that coffee, right? Or you ask them for whatever it is, and then you can talk about it, right? Or if you're going to be going to like some big event, like a conference that's a few days, try and find out if you can volunteer. That is the best way to network, because you get to meet so many different people. You don't have this pressure of, I have to talk to somebody a certain kind of way, but the people that you are around get to see what you can do. Because when you're volunteering, you're working for the event. So you get to talk to everybody, but you also get to shine in so much way or form. So those are my 2 little tidbits for all of y'all who are new to the networking world. And networking, it can be nasty. You're going to meet some people that you're like, why did you even come to me? Why are we talking? And then you're going to meet some people that you just realize are absolutely fabulous, and you're going to be working with them for a long time, or building those relationships. So thank you all for that. Again, to the audience, I know we got a whole bunch of folks. People really like the network across comments. So that's dope. And for any of y'all who have questions, feel free to throw them out. And while y'all do that, I will ask the next one. We're going to start with Vanessa this time. And the question is, the media industry often faces criticism for its underrepresentation of women, especially women of color. Can you speak to your experience as a Black or Latina woman in media, and offer advice to aspiring professionals?
Mm-hmm. Um, Part of my experience is I am half white. My mother's from Mexico, my dad's white, and I present as white for most people. And I really have learned and recognized over the years like how much privilege that affords me in that I recognize there are spaces and rooms I've been a part of that, it's those moments where you can't really pinpoint if it's true or not, but or have a gut sense that would it be possible if I presented differently or if they knew this thing about me? And so I am very grateful for that because I recognize that it's afforded me opportunities that I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have otherwise had. But I think also because I've been able to be in those spaces and I think back a lot to my time in higher education, which are institutions that were designed for privileged folks and are still run by mostly white male leaders, as are many newsrooms. Um, where I have found success amidst the frustrations that I spoke to earlier on constantly feeling like my ideas were being shoved off into this little corner was finding allies or accomplices who were aligned and really willing to advocate and push for projects that meant a lot and that we were trying to try things a little differently. Even like in public radio, we were experimenting with how long to leave a Spanish soundbite on the air. And, there really is no hard, fast rule. And so initially it was, 3 seconds and then dipping into English and using translation, which is awful. And it doesn't let the voice or the soundbite sit in that person's experience. And so we started to push a little bit more and then push a little bit more. And then we did a Spanish commercial and got some feedback that wasn't always positive on that. But I wasn't doing it alone. And I think that's what helped me be courageous in some spaces is to have someone else with me, whether they were also a woman and or a woman of color or a person in a leadership position who had a little bit more say or influence than I did and could help, um, boost these ideas and make them happen. So I think I think the work we're all doing, we're doing it because I guess I should just speak for myself. I got tired of having these conversations and it gets exhausting. And I got to a place where I thought, you know what, I'm not willing to compromise on my values anymore. And I really want to work with folks who are deeply committed to thinking differently about the way that we are telling stories and the kinds of stories that we're producing. And I know that my people are out there and we're going to be able to accomplish this together. And so I think that has been my experience. And we talked about the struggles already a little bit too. And I think I speak with folks and organizations a lot about the importance of recognizing our implicit bias in the work that we do. For ourselves, also, all humans have biases, but also when we're working with organizations to really be willing to challenge them on the way that they're approaching the work that they're doing and the voices they're including and who's missing from conversations. And um, not everyone's willing to do the work and that's okay. Maybe those aren't the right partners, but I think it's a really important part of the conversation. And those of us who are able to have conversations like that with folks need to continue to do that because it needs to be explicitly addressed and talked about um, representation matters because when we start to see ourselves in things, it really does give us that boost of confidence. And it also, so much of what we've talked about around mentorship and bringing people up with us, it's important to show them what's possible.
I was on mute. Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, I think that there's a lot of spaces where we sometimes don't realize the privilege that we have, even when we do come from marginalized communities, right? Like I'm a white presenting Latina as well. And what does that look like? If I don't open my mouth, people don't, they can't tell who I am, where I'm from, right? And so what does that mean for the spaces that I go into, and so thank you for sharing that, what your experience has been, the conversations that you are willing to have, because they are important to have. And the folks that look like us should be the ones who are having them. Keisha, same question. And I know you touched about it a little bit when you were talking about, being one of the only young, Black, non-white folks and non-older white men. Yeah, all of that, all of the categories in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I touched on that. Like I definitely was in those spaces, and had to navigate and like I said, just make space for myself. One of the things that I was thinking about that I did was I tried to utilize my background, my culture to be an asset to my job. So I'm thinking about very specifically, like they had a event one year that, or not as an event, they had a live show one year that they did on voting and the Latino community, and they wanted, and they were gonna bring in, it might have been around Hispanic Heritage Month, but they were gonna bring in a Latino host, and they wanted a lot of representation from the community in the audience. And so um, I was able to work on that show, and I was like, hey, I know, young advocate, young Latinos who are advocate for this kind of work. And I tapped into my sorority, and I was able to get actually one of our sorority sisters on the panel, and was able to leverage kind of like my networking community to be able to support the show, and then also weigh in to make sure like they were presenting the material in a way that was culturally, sensitive and also inclusive and all of those things. And so I've done that as, both as a Black Latina woman for all the things that I represent, and been able to navigate that and utilize that. I know sometimes specifically I've been put on in the doc space, I've been put on specific projects that dealt with communities of color so that the individuals we were interviewing could feel more comfortable opening up and and having sort of someone who could speak to their experience, right? And so that's been again just utilizing my who I am fully and what I can bring to a story or to a project. So I try to do that. I've tried to do that whenever I can. Um, and so that that's I guess some of the advice I have, right, is like what can you bring to your work that can be that is representative of your culture, that can help push that work forward and make you an asset to your job. So yeah, definitely been in those spaces. And oh, the other thing I wrote down, I was thinking about too, is I spoke a lot to my white male colleagues, like all the time. I would have lunch with them, just kind of like just kind of just shooting, whatever, just kind of talking to them, getting a sense of like, oh, what are you looking to do next? And tell me a little bit about your journey here. Cause I was like, even though I know our journeys look different, and I know that when we enter different spaces, sometimes it's not the same. I would take notes because I would see how the confidence, when you walk into a room and the questions they would ask and the way they talk to their producers versus the way I would talk to my producer. And I would be like, oh, you know what? That's a good way to ask that. I'm gonna go over there and demand that, and I would try to get a sense of how much money they were making. Like, oh yeah, oh you got a raise, really? That's great. How much you make? Like to try to just see where I fit in, because you don't get that information, right? Like nobody will tell you. And so to be able to say like, okay, well, this person has the same exact resume as me, more or less, but is getting these kind of opportunities. What is that? How can I like see if I can move in a different way? And again, like I've had to leave jobs after like several years to be like, okay, you know what? I'm not seeing my value here. I'm gonna go somewhere else where I can be valued and move up the ladder. And I've been vocal about it. Like I'm gonna go do this. Maybe when I move up a little bit in positions, I'll come back. Maybe you'll consider wanting to bring me back on, or we'll just have a conversation then. But I also say like don't be afraid to try something different, a new company, a new environment, a new group of people that can really value, everything that you can bring to the table.
No, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. You were networking. That's what you were doing, networking and asking those questions and, and taking notes. And absolutely, even if somebody's journey doesn't look like yours, like there's so much to learn, right? Like even the three of y'all journeys are different and there's so much to learn from each other. And y'all have been in different spaces and so understanding that like you all bring something to the table and it's phenomenal. Ashley, same question.
Yeah, well, both Vanessa and Keisha brought up really great points. I noticed, I feel like from Vanessa, a lot of what she was saying touched on just like being willing to stand your ground and like fight for the stories that you believe in. And, with Keisha, one of the things that you said that I always tell just anyone I encounter who is like trying to break into this industry. I know with like journalism, you're supposed to be quote unquote objective, and you're actually discouraged from bringing yourself into the room. But one of the things that Keisha says is that, you know, she uses her experiences in her work. And that is something that I always encourage everyone to do. Like, bring yourself to the room, into the room. If you're going to be there, be there. And that means your experiences should be there too. There's no way we can be fully objective. Everyone brings where they come from into their work in one way or another. So I always encourage people to lean into that. And that's something that I definitely try to do. I think one of the challenges, especially knowing that within the Latinx community, we're made up of so many different countries and races. Now that different organizations are wanting more quote unquote Latinx representation in their content, they have an idea of what that looks like. And it often does not look like me. It often does not look like Keisha. And you have to fight for it when you're in the room. And sometimes you won't win that fight. There was a time that I was developing a docu-series that a network said, you know, we really just want to get a Latinx story in there. What do you got? So this was like right after In the Heights came out and all the controversy around not having Black Latinos in the Heights. This was like the most talked about thing on Twitter. So I developed a pitch around that, and the response from the network was, "This is too niche, and we want something around Latinx people who vote for Donald Trump." So in me standing my ground, I was like, I'm not doing this story, period. Like, I'm pitching something that has nothing to do with quote unquote Latinx people. Like, it's not happening. And thankfully, the executive producers really trusted me because we developed a relationship, and they understood that, like, if I wasn't going to be the person working on that story, then they were going to be, you know, in a really bad spot if they continued to push it forward. So sometimes you really do have to be willing to stand your ground, even if it's scary. Like, it's not always comfortable to stand up for yourself and to advocate for yourself. But I think that's one of the things, because of all of the identities that each of us hold, that we have to get comfortable doing. So yeah, that is a challenge in this industry, in any industry, any room we walk into, to be honest. But yeah, definitely bringing yourself into a room and standing up for that person that you're bringing into that room, I would say.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that. I agree, right? I think sometimes standing up and standing your grounds when you're the only one that's doing so is scary. Um, but in the end, you're better off for it, because why would you want to work on something that you don't want to work on, that doesn't represent you, that isn't who you are, right? Like, saying no sometimes is the best thing that you can say. And same thing when somebody else says no to you, right? Like, that rejection is that redirection into the other projects, into the other things. We have a question from the audience, y'all. And the question is, in the beginning of the conversation, there was some talk about the importance of data to inform and accomplish projects of value to the community. What is your perspective to how the media has evolved from that point of view with the use of social media content and other media outlets? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'll,
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I'll, what, I don't know if this is the answer to that question, but what came up for me is that what I appreciate about digital media and is that there are a lot of folks who started creating their own content in their own spaces, and we're no longer sort of depending on what we I think in our careers grew up to know as traditional media outlets. Given a lot of given that freedom to create spaces of like web-based only storytelling projects that previously would not have existed or potentially had success because we were so dependent on, you know, reaching larger audiences. And so I think what I have seen as an evolution is seeing more creators and folks creating, whether it's a production company or an Instagram feed or a TikTok channel or a YouTube series that is entirely made up of folks who care deeply about this project and want to create it to look a specific way because maybe it wasn't the kind of project that a network would have picked up or that a studio would have picked up. And so they went off and made it anyway and were still able to build an audience and to build community. And I think there's a lot more freedom to create your own work. And I think, for folks who are coming into this space, I think that just speaks to the opportunity you have to, it doesn't prevent you, even if you're not working for a big organization or a big media company or with a studio, you can still create content and find folks and build community and then maybe then it takes off or it takes off on its own. But I just think there's a lot more freedom with social media and digital media to create content and find your people online and to share it with folks with whom it's going to resonate and have impact and sort of develop this life of its own. That I think a lot about in my career. When I was going to school for journalism, I was learning Dreamweaver and how to lay out a newspaper. And there was no social media. Facebook came out in my senior year of college, and there was no education on how to use it strategically. And I was cutting my reel on a VHS tape. And to see how far it has evolved is so fascinating because I would tell my students all the time, there are jobs now that did not exist when I was your age. And there are jobs that are going to happen that we haven't even dreamt up yet. And there are forms of storytelling that we haven't even imagined. And so I just feel like this evolution, and for the person who asked the question, I don't know if this is answering it, but that there's just feels like there's like so much opportunity to really, I think what like Keisha and Ashley were saying, to like bring yourself into these projects and imagine something that maybe hasn't been made before. And there's going to be a space for it, and there are going to be people who are going to find it and receive it and celebrate it.
I love
Yeah,
that. Thank you.
I would just add that I think the data is still important, right? I think research is still important, fact checking, like we're all journalism people in this space as well, like fact checking is still important. And so I think, hopefully as consumers, we can find content that gives us those things, but also like, to Vanessa's point, these content creators are giving us like access and lens to unique stories, to perspectives that like maybe mainstream media doesn't always want to share. And so I love when like I don't TikTok. It's bad. I probably should, but I don't. But when I'm scrolling on Instagram and I'll find like I'll see a reel that like talks to something that I think is really impactful, and it's one person's perspective, one person's opinion, but then it leads me to like start googling and researching and like trying to, and I find other articles and I just go down a rabbit hole of like getting more information. But I think it's that like personal connection in the story, from the, what do they say, like the tugging on the heartstrings, right, that like brings you in, that I think is so impactful with social media. And it's quick, our attention spans these days are short, and so like you kind of need to get like get the cliff notes, or no one uses cliff notes, get the get the short, no one, it's such a, no one, even half of these people don't know, anyway, get the abridged version, right, of the story. But then if you want to dig deeper, right, you can go and do that and tap into some of the long form radio, or longer, like other avenues to find story. But I think social media just gives people so much power in being able to communicate, and I think it's great. But I would just say, keep fact checking, because we not everything out there is always going to be 100% factual. So.
Absolutely. And I think nowadays also you see so much that doesn't get fact checked, and it's just out there. And once it's out there, and it goes viral. And now there's too many people that know it. And I know we're dwindling down on the last 5 minutes, and we've talked a lot about the challenges, the ickiness, the things that you have to do, the grit that you have to have. So I want to end this on a high note, and I'm gonna ask y'all a question. I did not prepare y'all for it, but it's easy, I promise. um, so when it comes to the industry, oh, wait, I lied. There's a question from the audience, so you won't get my question. What level of influence do you think social media now has on traditional media production when developing or discovering new projects, since it's now very present in our lives?
I'll speak from the digital video space. When I was in the digital video space, so many of our ideas were generated from seeing what people were talking about and what they cared about. So often, like, you don't want to make something that no one is going to watch. So if we noticed that there was conversation about something online, that often drove some of the things that we would make, because we knew that people would care about those things. So I would say that that is a huge level of influence, especially on not even just with video production, but you'll see like full articles that are just like tweets embedded within the articles, and you barely even have to write anymore because we're driving the conversations on Twitter or on TikTok or wherever else. So I would say in that space, like, what people are talking about has a huge influence, and that people can leverage that. If you do want to see more things, discussed in your standard like media outlets, you can talk about them online. And I guarantee if that conversation gets going, it will, get covered. Now, a lot of things are in our hands on social media. As far as like developing projects for television, I'm sure people pluck ideas from social media all the time when they're not supposed to. So in that regard, like, I see people on Twitter all the time offering their film ideas and writing out full like pitches. Probably shouldn't do that because someone's going to steal it. Social media, yeah, just has a huge influence on the things that we make and create now. So that would be my answer to that.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so the last question of the night before we end this, what about the industry gives you joy? And whoever wants to take it first. Nothing. Y'all just do this for funsies, but y'all don't get no joy out of it.
Okay, I'll say um, I think that there's something for everyone, right? Like, I mean, literally, like, there's some, if you like, what is it? There's like a Dr. Seuss baking competition. So, like, there's like stuff for everyone, right? So, I think there's content for every single person out there. And I think there's a never ending, I think what gives me joy is that there's always more to tell. So, even if, like, someone's already like tapped into a space that you're interested in telling a story, there's always another perspective, always an updated version. And then the way that we tell media, the way that we tell stories nowadays, with how we talk about social media, there's so many avenues to consume media, and that never stops changing either. So I think I find joy in just like learning new things about the industry. And I don't work in it as actively anymore, but I loved being on sets. It's just, you just don't, there's nothing like it. You have to live in and experience it. It's a community. You build a family. You're, like people say, you're together so many hours at a time. And it's a crazy schedule, and it's just madness. And then you create something and it airs and you're so proud. And then you move on to the next thing. So I think there's a lot of joy to be had in the process, and then also the output of what people get to consume.
I love that. Thank you. Ashley or Vanessa, what about it brings you some joy?
Yeah, I think so much of my joy, like, God bless the people in my life, because whenever I'm working on a project or whenever I just got back from a shoot or something, I just can't stop talking about it and like all the new things I learned. And like, shout out to them for just listening and holding space, because I'm sure there are times that they don't want to. But even like this summer, you meet people who you would never meet otherwise doing some of the work that we do. And that is one of my favorite things. Like this summer, I met a beautiful family who I would have never met otherwise. And like they've totally like introduced me to a style of music that I'd never listened to. And now I've ruined my whole Spotify Wrapped for the year. I know I have. And like they're just, yeah, like not only the people who you work with, but the people who you get to interview who allow you into their space and into their lives. Like that's where I get my joy, because often, you know, the ins and outs of the industry can be really toxic. You can deal with some people who are not great. And then you meet someone who you're just like, man, like you trusted me with your story. I'm going to do everything I can to like tell it in a responsible way that you would be proud of. So yeah, that's where I get a lot of my joy doing this work. And yeah, with the people who I work with, when you do meet people who are wonderful and you have your little trauma bond sometimes because you went through a really tough, like 12-hour, 14-hour day or whatever, there's still nothing like it, like being on that set and being able to bond and then grab some fast food afterward and talk about everything you just did. Like there's a lot of fun moments and opportunities in this kind of work. And yeah, being able to share it, like, oh my gosh, I swear it has endorphins when you just get to share your work that you've spent so long, you know, working on. So yeah, I really enjoy this work. I'm excited to see how, you know, it continues to evolve for me in the different avenues that I can explore. And I think, you know, possibilities are endless for people who want to continue to enter this industry.
Love that. Thank you. And Vanessa, last but not least.
I mean, everything Keisha and Ashley said, I just felt it in like giving me all the feels and the butterflies, because I think working in this industry, you have to have that like fire in your belly to be able to endure a lot of what we've all described as being the really difficult parts. And I think to add to what they said is the community building. I think that part that Ashley was describing, when you finally get to share it beyond your close circle of friends you've been speaking with, is when you get the feedback. And I think critical feedback is also really important, but it's those folks who encounter that piece of content or that story or whatever it is that you made, and they shared their story in response to what was shared and produced. And it's this ripple effect. And so I do think that there are limitless possibilities. Again, where I feel like I'm seeing more content that is unlike anything I've seen before, and that feels really exciting. And that also that no path is the same. There are different ways to enter it. There are different ways to move through it, and I think there's just a lot still that hasn't been made that we're waiting for people out there to make with us and for us and for the people around us. So it just, despite how hard it is, it still feels hopeful somehow. And I don't know how we get sucked into that, but I still keep believing it, and it feels good, and I get whipped right back in, and I love it, and I'm here for it.
I love it. Thank you all, Vanessa, Ashley, and Keisha. Thank you for sharing the space with me. Thank you for sharing yourselves with the audience. For our audience members, thank you so much for staying on with us, for listening, for asking your questions. Y'all were repping the entire country. We love it. You all have a beautiful evening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.